Technology is exploding, and it will continue to do so. So the need for human beings who can manage that, wrangle it, direct it, use it for your business to succeed is going up. The question is that what's the curve of that versus what's the capability of AI? And we don't know that, so there's some uncertainty, but I think they're going to match each other. Welcome to Modern Logic for Your Business, where we talk about AI and technology. I'm Andy Ron, and with me is Dustin Brusnak. Today, Dustin and I talk about Block and Jack Dorsey and changes that he just announced, as well as what's going on with the federal government, Anthropic, and their models, and who's a threat to national security. It's a great conversation, so stick with us. We'll be right in right now. Here we are, episode 17.
Keep happening.
It keeps happening. So this was recorded a couple weeks ago, and sometimes I feel dumb. Even how can we try to record more than a week in advance? Because things happen so quickly in the world of AI. But I think it's okay because we're probably living in some ways maybe a little ahead of our listeners. Certainly, we've talked about coding is a little bit in the future, so it's okay. So forgive us if there's some dramatic news that has come down in the last week. We could talk about stuff.
We'll get to that in a few weeks.
We'll get to that in a few weeks. But right now, what's top of mind, a couple things. There was just a huge layoff at Block. I'd like to talk about that. And also Anthropic, OpenAI, and the Department of Defense seem to be just like completely at odds with each other in a way I can't wrap my head around yet. So I think that'll be interesting to talk about. And then I think one or two other fun things we can throw in. And yeah, so I think that's more than enough to talk about. So which one do you start with? What do you want?
Let's go with the Department of Defense. I figure we'll have real difficulty filling the 40 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
We just really have to dig deep. So maybe give a framing of what happened for the...
Yeah, so for a few days we've been hearing rumors that the current administration wanted to use technology from Anthropic, called namely Claude, for Department of Defense activities. And my understanding is that Anthropic, one of their big differentiators from OpenAI, and honestly, the reason a lot of folks left OpenAI to form Anthropic was they didn't think OpenAI was paying close enough attention to the harm that AI could do to the world. And so they really were trying to build Claude in a way that's, no, this is an AI company that's trying to at least recognize the harm that AI could do. And we've been talking about harm, maybe like taking people's jobs, what could be the economic impact. But in this case, they're like, we're happy to work with the Department of Defense, but we just really don't want our AI involved in military decision-making. And I don't know.
And specifically, they said they don't want it being used in autonomous systems that kill people or in mass surveillance of the U.S. population, specifically the U.S. population, which is interesting. I think the other piece to pull out here is Claude was the number one vendor to the Department of, I'm going to say defense because I don't love war in general, but
I believe that Congress still identifies it as Department of Defense. So
so they're basically they were already embedded in a lot of the operational and intelligence decision making, and this is them. To their credit, I think, saying they really care. In AI, we call this the alignment issue, right? They're trying to be true to that, and OpenAI then stepped in and took over. Looks like they're going to be taking over those contracts.
And I can see certainly the Department of Administration being upset because they probably had things in actions already deployed, and they're like, wait, now we have to change course. That would be annoying anytime you're working with a vendor and they pull a rug out from under you.
Ostensibly, you sold to that buyer, and that buyer very clearly is going to want to use it for these sorts of things, and in that way. So I can see both sides of this issue, because if you're sitting in Anthropic's seat, you obviously don't want to be the people that create the Terminator, right? And it's hard to align your model with a series of ethics around not killing humans, and then you're at the same time trying to figure out how to get it to kill humans. That doesn't seem like it fits with their core mission. But I also understand as a buyer at the Pentagon, you're doing these things to protect the American people, and you want a technology that you can rely on, especially
Certainly,
AI that's going to be everywhere.
A lot of what the defense strategy of the U.S. is the overwhelming threat. So if we have an arsenal of AI-powered weapons that are super effective, then people are probably not going to mess with us. We don't even ever have to actually use them. But where I just don't get it, where I get crosses the line is they've designated Anthropic as some kind of horrible label, a supply chain risk, which has never been done to a U.S. company ever before. And it's something that my understanding is designed for like terrorist organizations. Like you can't do business with, what was it, Weiwa or whatever, this Chinese vendor.
Wow,
or
not just terror organizations that may be compromised by external governments that we don't have good relationships with. So it's not necessarily saying that they're a terrorist organization. It's saying that bringing them into the supply chain for the Pentagon might create additional risk. And that has been largely seen. My understanding is it's not so much like an overt risk as some spies might get in through this mechanism.
Yeah. Because I think like the telecommunications equipment was probably, they found, it's never been publicly said, but when this came out about that company, the telecommunications equipment, I believe, probably had spyware embedded in the hardware so that it could overtly monitor the traffic going through and then send it to presumably
Well, and you
China.
saw what Israel did with the cell phones, right?
Yes, like they could make cell phones
these are the
explode.
kinds of things that they're trying to. So having an American company with this designation just feels like it's really out of band. I do think it's probably negotiating hyperbole where they were trying to put pressure. Either that or it's taking their toys and going home. If it's not a negotiating position, then it's hard to see it as anything but spite.
It does seem like a punitive action, especially since as private businesses, like you should be allowed to make choices about who you're going to sell your products to and how those products are used. Like Apple, for example, they dictate what apps I can install on the phone I own. That's a limitation that's legal and personally pisses me off because it's like, I own this phone. Why do I need Apple's permission to run software on it? It just doesn't make sense to me. I would love it if there was a law that says, hey, if you make a compute device, you should be required to empower the people you sell that to install the software they choose. And that's not the case.
That's actually a really interesting corollary because for a long time, Amy Klobuchar's office, Senator, she has been arguing that because there's only the Android operating system, that level of control of the store constitutes a monopoly and monopolistic control.
And Europe
for those of us who work in the app world, it's very hard to argue the other way, having been in the app world for decades, built apps, because of the outmoded power Apple has on your business if you want to be on their platform. They basically make almost all the business decisions. And if you just do one little thing, they can just turn a switch and your business is gone. And that's really unreasonable to have a level of control. And I think what's interesting there for this is, in a similar way, we only have 2 or 3 really robust frontier models right now. And so this is an example where you could argue that Dario saying, I think his name's Dario, I should know.
Yeah, the CEO of Anthropic.
Yeah, the CEO of Anthropic saying you can't use it for X, Y, and Z might be the opposite. It might be them exerting too much control over the market given their positioning, or you could see it as a reasonable thing for a company to do. I personally fall on the side of saying that you don't want your technology to kill people is a pretty reasonable thing to do. We here at Modern Logic, I'm on record as saying I don't take contracts with companies that can cause harm to other people. That's just not something we want to be involved in. We know that there are businesses that need to support those sorts of organizations.
I don't think we have the insurance for that, to be honest. What kind of insurance policy do you need?
I know we don't have the insurance because I read the insurance policies. But I think it's reasonable for them to articulate. I think it's unreasonable for the government to have given them this classification. It is, I think, very reasonable for the Pentagon to pick a different vendor. And OpenAI has stepped in. And in some ways, that is hard because there's some internal documentation from OpenAI. Basically, my understanding, I haven't read the documentation, is that they effectively said, we'll do whatever you want, including surveil the American people, do like
which
sight
is not
unseen
new.
analysis of,
we know that American companies have participated in supporting illegal or
Palantir is the big one. I don't know if it's illegal, but they definitely are.
I was just thinking going all the way back to, I'm blanking on the dude's name. The guy who had to flee to Russia because he leaked all that information about surveillance.
Snowden?
Yeah, Snowden. But and that was way back in the Obama administration. That work was going on. And AT&T and the other telecommunication companies went along with, I don't know if it was the NSA or CIA or who was doing it, but it was questionably legal. Didn't they do funny business like, oh, it was the server that was spying on Americans was overseas, and so technically it wasn't violating the law because
it was metadata, and in that way the company owned the metadata, and it wasn't private communications.
But still,
anyway, it was very gray. Yeah.
So anyway,
but it's hard to talk about this without getting too political. But I think overall, for us, the knock-on effects are Claude has, I think, what is currently the best model. I haven't looked at GPT.
Actually, I wanted yesterday, but I did want to talk a little about GPT 5.4, but I don't know a lot about it yet.
But they have had the frontier model that has performed the best for many use cases, including agentic and coding use cases, for the last few months. And so will this have an impact on the long-term position of Anthropic? I actually don't think so, with the exception of this designation maybe making it hard for certain federal agencies to interact with it.
I suspect this is going to resolve. It's going to be a flash in the pan, a big flash, but
I would be hopeful because
it's a negotiating tactic. You push things to 11 and it forces people to compromise more quickly. But also there's open litigation between the two. That Anthropic claims that this wasn't a legal action.
The courts.
So between good old fashioned, call it diplomacy. I don't know if this is shotgun diplomacy. And
what we don't need is the government trying to take a frontier model and reduce its market position right now, because I think what we really want to see is what we've seen the last few years, which is the frontier models themselves going head to head for market share, because that's generated a ton of innovation. And I don't
traditionally like government picking winners. I'm going to designate this company as the one that'll win. That's counter to the consumer's best interest. We like,
and I think we can really clearly see with the case, especially of Anthropic and OpenAI, the benefits that capitalism purports to have, right? Like, I think there are certainly plenty of negatives we can see out in the world, and there's places where capitalism doesn't apply. But I think one place it really does apply is competitive innovation in highly sought after markets like AI. And the reason we're seeing so much model movement so quickly is because these Gemini, Claude, and OpenAI just keep one-upping each other to the point where you'll see a model release, and the week after another model will get, and that, I don't think the pace of innovation will be as fast. And we don't want the government, who ostensibly has said they're pro-business and they're not going to regulate these. Also, we don't want them putting their thumb on this just because.
What better testament of the power of capitalism? Not that, like I said, I'm not a fan of it 100%, but the U.S. government has a lot of capital, and yet they weren't able to develop a model as compelling as these ones that these businesses created. There must be geeks working for some branch of the military or whatever who were trying to train models the same way that these companies have, but evidently they haven't been as successful. And that's really interesting. Like, for something that's apparently so fundamentally important to keeping our military position, they have to go to a private company to get the technology to do it. Whereas I'm betting, like, we don't go to a private company to buy our nukes or I don't know about other things.
Maybe we might actually. I don't know much about the supply chain for nuclear weapons.
Suppose
certainly not for the material, but I'm betting there's a company that puts those missiles together. It's probably,
or actually that has the secret recipe about how you build one.
Because that's the American way, right? Is private defense contractors have put these together. I think that's probably happening. I know certainly with the cloud they've done that as well. So I think it is a model we've seen before, but I do think it does say something about the frontier models, that their secret sauce is good enough that the government, for something this fundamental, hasn't tried to replicate it. And I do think just the sheer amount of hardware required. The reality is there isn't enough of it in the world, I think, to create a fourth frontier model, right? There just
I don't
isn't. They're
know.
buying it all. Look at the cost of RAM and memory, computer
I know.
memory.
Have you looked at buying yourself like a new gaming PC lately? You can't even get the parts.
The
It's
thing that I spent
sad.
$100 on 2 years ago is now $800 for the same model. That hasn't been changed or updated in any way, and that's happening across the board. So it could be that the government has
Yeah.
a big built purchase order out for all this hardware, and Nvidia just keeps going, oh, we're making it as fast as we can and you'll get it in 2035, which is why
Unreal.
Nvidia is growing so quickly. And Crucial is stepping back out of the consumer market, which is one of the big memory
Crucial was the go-to
manufacturers.
for the last 30 years for buying RAM for your PC.
Yeah,
It's
for high
amazing.
quality, reasonably priced RAM, Crucial was the thing.
Yeah.
And now they're only going to support AI and business use cases. And so it could be that this is literally an infrastructure problem, that it's just, they might be able to replicate the model and they just can't because.
Well, it might also echo just how much sort of uncertainty and fear there is about what are the long-term knock-on effects of AI. And I'm
Yeah,
sure the folks at the Pentagon are like, we don't want to take any chances. Like this could upend everything we know about how
defense works.
defense works in the future. So they want to have every option available to them, and they're not messing around.
But we all grew up with
So
the Terminator movies, so I could
I
totally understand
know.
Anthropic basically going, yeah, we think the same way, but the opposite. We've drawn the opposite conclusion from the whole AI might be really bad for defense. And
Well,
I feel like if you go
like
into the zeitgeist of all
right.
of our media that we grew up with, like putting and especially objectively knowing what we do about LLMs, putting an LLM into anything autonomous right now in any way is a really terrible idea without having a human. Said by that, autonomous weapons, because it's
I
great
know.
in workflows,
Presumably they have a kill, but what if someone? There are autonomous killing systems out there. Like I was
right,
reading some article about the horrible just situation in Ukraine with these drones that originally were designed by Iraq. Interesting. Russia bought some, figured out how to make them themselves, and now are iterating and improving. And they look like a big flying wing, and they got 40 kilograms or so, I guess, maybe pounds, probably kilograms of C4 on them. And they just point them at the Ukraine. And then I'm not even sure how particular they are about what they strike. They have cameras and sensors on them, and they just kind of look around in Kiev, and then they find a tall building. They're like, looks good to me. And they fly into it and blow up. And
and there was
they,
an article about those Predator or Reaper drones using facial machine learning analysis to determine who to bomb in Afghanistan and getting it wrong some percentage of the time without human interaction. And
oh,
that's
I didn't.
old machine learning. That wasn't new LLM based
Yeah,
machine
yeah.
learning. It
So,
was
but
just, hey, this person's beard face combo matches. And again, we did image analysis AI at Adobe to understand like that kind of stuff is terrifying because it's not going to be right 100% of the time. And I don't think it's unreasonable to hold a position where if your system is not right 100% of the time, you want a human pulling the trigger. I think that's a
yeah, I
reasonable
mean, I can
stance to
see that
have.
point of view, but also if you're really talking about war, like indiscriminate killing of soldiers and even civilians, it happens.
Yeah.
And that's the, I don't know.
I
There
think
are
I
war
would love
crimes
to see the
tribunals after the
LLM
fact.
decision making get significantly more sophisticated for those kinds of use cases before I would
Yes.
be
And you might say,
comfortable
I
in
want to have
Anthropic
a
doing
kill
this. Yeah.
switch or like a confirm, like it needs to confirm. But then you can say there's radio interference and jamming. An
Right.
autonomous weapon that's deployed maybe can't get a hold of you because there's so much radio interference. So if it's to be an effective weapon, it needs to go and find the target and do the thing.
Which is why the other
Oy.
side of this equation makes sense. So it's too
Yeah.
we're not going to solve it. I think the reason is this is actually unsolvable, but I do think both sides have reasonable arguments. I think the outcome of the Pentagon designating Anthropic with this special designation is unreasonable. Hopefully, it gets changed, and I think,
Also, and yeah, I
you
hope
know,
this will hopefully evolve and that company isn't like getting down by this. Certainly, Dario, is it Amodai?
yeah,
Without my glasses on, it looks like his last name is A Model, as if the CEO of Anthropic is actually an AI himself. But I
you
think it's a
found out
human
here
being.
first, folks.
But he has a post that just came out and he talks about you can still do business with Anthropic. This is pretty narrow in its scope. It's just for military applications that this restriction's in place. Hopefully that is true. And if you're using Claude today, even if you have a contract with the US government, sounds like you can continue to use it unless you're like actually building the Predator drone and we're planning to put the AI in it.
Yeah, if you're that guy, maybe not. But
Yeah.
I also think the model is so good, and the model makers have a lot of power. The frontier model makers have a lot of power in this scenario too. Anthropic is not some weak entity. This is going to be $1 trillion company. They're already worth hundreds of billions. They've got plenty of billions in the bank. And I think ultimately the market can't really afford to ignore one of the best models in existence. And I think the math will win eventually. And the US is it's a big government, but it's not the only place in the world either, right? So I'm not too worried about Anthropic's long-term.
Another threat to Anthropic, we don't talk a lot about this. It wasn't on the itinerary, but Claude or OpenAI dropped GPT 5.4 this week. And I haven't had a chance to use it much myself, but just looking at the press release from OpenAI, it is eye-opening, and it's starting to really come for the knowledge worker kinds of tasks now. Deep integrations.
I would say this is
spreadsheets.
This is their direct response to Claude Cowork, which dropped in January. Yep. It's really obvious that they're feeling threatened by the agentic workflow support that Cowork and Claude have been bringing to the table in the first part of this year. And honestly, they absolutely should be. It's a game changer.
But so for those kinds of tasks, putting together a presentation, doing some kind of numerical analysis with a spreadsheet, or document production, like AI is here to springboard your team to a 2, 3, 4x multiplier of productivity. And I don't think it's smoke. I think if you're going to actually start to see that. And if you're not trying those tools out, it's
time to start. Well. And the best way to get started is to download the Claude desktop app and hit the Cowork tab. And you have to have the $20 membership, I think, in order to use it. But if you want an experience that it's not quite as mind-blowing as the first time you used one of these, but it is pretty mind-blowing, ask it to build something out on your desktop that you would normally do normal work for, and you'll understand that knowledge work fundamentally changed in late December, January this year, and that the extrapolation that we're making that most knowledge work will look like developer work does today is, I think, reasonable. I think we're continuing to see it march in that direction. You can see very clearly that the models are saying we're going in this direction. Nothing I'm seeing on the technology point is going to limit it coming for knowledge workers. It's just going to accelerate. I think I'm not a doomer. I think on this, I think there will be plenty of opportunities created in the space, but for certain, the opportunities will accrete to the people who are more proactive about understanding.
If you stand still, you'll find yourself obsolete. But I believe that as things accelerate and iterate, we're going to see new opportunities appear. It's like a fractal. You know what a fractal is, where like it looks like a flower or something, but then when you zoom in, you realize that every branch of the stem is actually made of multiple little branches, and you zoom in, that just keeps happening. I think that like the opportunity for new work is like that. So as the ability to do work gets less costly, or conversely, employees get more productive, you're able to capture more of those little niches and crannies in kind of the eco biosphere or whatever of opportunity around your business. And so there's stuff to do. It might even be more interesting stuff to do, because instead of having to paint with broad brush to treat all your customers alike, now you can start to differentiate and give each customer the kind of treatment that's suitable specifically for them. So you need to start looking for those opportunities and task your folks to pursue those as they get more effective. Not do, and this was the other big topic, I'm really kind of PO'd at Jack Dorsey for, he runs Square, which he renamed Block, which I also think is dumb. But anyway, 10,000 employees working there. He looks at these advances in productivity due to AI and he's, you know what? I'm just going to let 40% of my workforce go. Sorry.
Not because they're losing money, not because they're financially
profitable.
threatened. and their
because you think,
profit is
look,
growing.
it's coming. The AI it's coming. I don't need all these people anymore.
Mhm.
And I'm like, are you serious? You think your product is so perfect that there's no nuanced differentiation for your customer base that you could pursue now? That you have actually saturated the market space? There's no other place you could go in your business to grow. It's so narrow-minded. I'm actually convinced that what's going on is he mismanaged this organization and it became top heavy, or he had a lot
He
of initiatives that
overhired.
were just, and he overhired, and it was a big cluster, and he's using AI as an excuse for his bad leadership, because then he comes out looking like a visionary. He sees the future as opposed to the bumbling bonehead.
So they were
I don't know much
growing,
about
but
him.
my
Maybe he's amazing,
understanding,
but I
reading in
just,
between the lines, is that the fundamentals of that organization were that they were growing, but that growth was going to be facing some serious headwinds as they move forward. And
yeah,
so this, I think, is partially to get it ahead of the fundamentals before the market realized that. But I do think anyone who's been on the other side of layoffs, I mean, making layoff decisions, there's no way to lay off 40%, even if objectively he needed to do this for reasons, right? Or even if his stated reason was good, that AI was coming, which we obviously don't think it is. But let's just take that on face value. You can't lay off 40% of your organization and not lose something fundamental about who you are.
yeah. Well,
And the
just not to
number of
mention the,
senior people that I know personally that got laid off that would have been
or
assets to growing
is
whatever new
now
thing you wanted to
one
do.
of, what is it? I don't know what the numbers are. Like one of 10 people left on what was a 100-person team. How do you
Right. And
even go to work the next day? Well, now you're responsible for what 12 people used to do. You
how do
have
you
to
even
like
know what they all did? Just
yeah,
understanding what their
and you could
workflows
try to like
were.
what, just paste all their emails into an AI and say, "Help me catch up here." I
It's
just don't
funny you
think
say
that's,
that. I was talking to someone who manages, it's a city government's investments for one of the bigger cities in the country. And he was telling me that exact thing is happening in government as well. They'll cut like a whole division, and then they will literally pile the email onto the current leader and say, here's some AI, figure it out. Now you have two jobs. And this is not the way, folks. Like
yeah.
those of us out there trying to capture efficiency with AI, more power to you. Don't do it this way. This is not the right way to do it.
I get it. There are certain businesses that manage like big layoffs aren't new, but I don't
40%
think
is
it's
pretty.
a strategy, like a winning strategy. It just feels
But
like
I think
poor
40%
management.
on a profitable company, you don't see that very often. It's really common to see 7% or, but 40% for a
Yeah.
company whose numbers like ostensibly don't justify that it isn't a troubled organization. And then claiming the AI did it. And I think there are some good things. Like he gave some pretty reasonable severance. I think
Yeah.
the letter he sent to his people was about as kind as you can be with this kind of decision. And I'm not trying to defend him, but I will say I have seen organizations that have done a worse job with this sort of thing than he did.
Yeah.
And I think it does get to his character a little bit
He took
as,
ownership of the decision. It
yeah,
wasn't like he hired some outside person to do the dirty work.
there are plenty of CEOs that were laughed all the way to the bank. And at least on the surface, this was a hard decision for him. And whether we'd have to mind read to know where he's going. But so could you take Dorsey and put him aside and say, think about an organization of his size looking at AI, and they make the objective decision that we're going to remove 40% of our workforce because we really believe that they're going to be redundant in an AI future. And I think that's an interesting thing to talk about, because that is, I think, the sort of pervading narrative in Silicon Valley right now, and from these AI models, is that they are going to be coming for not 40% of jobs, 80% of jobs, 90% of jobs. And so I think there's also a conversation to be had. Does he end up looking like when Mark Zuckerberg bought Instagram on the other end of this? If Sam Altman and Anthropic are correct, and to some degree, my position is I'm playing devil's advocate here, but and if they're correct about the amount of economic advantage that these things can create, then he's out in front of that trend. And it does that then make him look like a visionary in 5 years? I don't personally think so, but I do think that when you look at the caliber of the models and their ability to impact your day-to-day workflows, you can see a world where you need less people to significantly less people to deliver the same result. We're already living in that in software, and that's just getting more and more aggressive. The benefits are compounding, and I think the resistance to that is actually the corporation's ability to adopt the tools on a per person level, right? Like it just takes time for humans to understand how to use these and how to use them wisely, and governance and all that. But once we get through that adaptive period, what happens to the US economy? What happens to the knowledge
Well,
worker? And
this is
these
a
are
bigger
real
question
things to be
than
concerned about, right?
I have to say that something that occurred to me. Let's finish your thought. I don't know. I am a little worried. On the other hand, like capitalism has a way of somehow staying relevant, even in the face of unprecedented change. And
Yeah.
so we're probably going to muddle through in some way, and it's not going to be ever a single point of everything you knew is no longer applies.
How many
We'll still have
businesses are these square/block people going to start using the same technology that got them laid off, right? Like the ability for someone to start a small business now in software it is easier than it has ever been, and it will
right.
continue to get easier.
What
Right.
is
So how much economic growth comes from that? And is it a net positive or a net negative? Certainly there's a lot of people who are looking at their lives that have been severely impacted right now. And we don't want to hand wave over that. But I do think, to your point, whenever you see these kinds of revolutions, it's like burning the forest down and letting the new growth come in. And capitalism is pretty good about new growth, but there are trees and bushes and shrubs that get burned and die as part of that situation. And usually there's this transition period where bad things happen and then we come out of it. So I'm actually optimistic about the long-term side effects of
right.
this, but a little more pessimistic about the near-term side effects. I think it behooves all of us to start considering
Well,
how we
what's the
use this
pressure
technology
against
wisely.
corporate cruelty? Do you think consumers will notice and switch from Square to some other financial system? Because God, it seems like there's not a lot of
I don't think
headwind
Block
there.
probably lost more than, I would highly
Another
doubt if they lost 1% of customers over this move, or
another
even
thing
a
I've
half a
seen
percent.
my friends talking about it is it time for software engineering folk to unionize and have a kind of collective bargaining position. Be like, you want to lay off 40% of us? None of us are showing up tomorrow. But my
Yeah,
fear is
it's too late.
it might be too late because the software engineering professionals have a really weak bargaining position right now. Or maybe this is our last chance. I don't know. That'll be an interesting thing to watch too. And I just don't know enough about how unions have successfully been created in the past to have any sense of whether this has a chance.
Yeah, this
But
isn't like an auto worker where someone has to show up on the shop floor and do the thing. This is a job where, what percentage do you think of software engineers, if you were to decide I'm not going to join the union, I'm just going to go work for Apple, let's
yeah,
say, and Apple was like, I can only hire you because everyone else is unionized, what percentage of your junior and mid-level engineers do you need right now with AI tooling to replace them, would you say?
it's I don't even know the answer to that because the role of the junior developer no longer exists.
Yeah.
But there is a role for new hires, but it's not writing code. It's
Writing
learning
specs.
how to use the AI to get stuff done. And I don't know how
So,
steep that learning curve is because in some ways we're all starting at the same ground floor together. Maybe it's a great time to get into that job because no one knows how to do it. The most we've had is 6 months experience. But how much of that is empowered by my legacy of 3 decades of whatever doing this? That
yeah.
gestalt is helping me do this new function better. I like to think it's helping a lot, but I don't actually know if that's true.
Right.
And
We all
it
want to
changes.
believe
Yeah,
weekly. So the reason I do draw that point is I think that if you were to make it harder for business owners to hire you right now in software engineering, that's probably not a good thing. And this is a place where I probably
Also, it's
fall
an
a little bit on more
international,
the pro-capitalist side of the equation, right? Which is
international discipline too. So even if Americans were to unionize, are you really going to get knowledge workers in other countries to join that same union? I'm not even sure it's possible.
and
Maybe it is.
if you remember back a few podcasts ago, we were talking about how software engineering ends up looking in the future. And one of the conjectures we had, and I think that I'll draw this back to the unions in a sec, is that software engineering is going to look a lot like the software gets written by the product owner, and then small teams of incredibly capable software developers, that's us, get brought in as support when things need to be done either really correctly or things start going wrong. But the majority of software is now in the hands of the business owner and the product owner. And then the size of the software market, development market, shrinks because more software is being developed by non-developers. And I think that's a bad time to get on the teeter-totter of negotiation, because you don't have a bargaining position if you are actively being replaced already. The whole point of a union is you can't replace us, so you better negotiate with us. And I feel like that is the argument for that, especially in the last few months, has been really eroded. And it's a shame because there's so many good people in software development. But I am hopeful that those people who are really good can find places being the mechanics, right, for the larger organizations that are going to be writing more software than ever is going to be written in the next 10 years. It's going to be
honestly, it's a huge
exponential
opportunity for small businesses, because you could never have dreamed of doing these novel technical things on your own when your core competency is something else. But now those things start to come in reach. And we were just talking with a company yesterday, and they have an ERP and it has an API, but they don't have a lot of developers there, so they don't use the API themselves. They've purchased a kind of a WYSIWYG no-code wrapper tool that talks to it, and it charges them hundreds of bucks per API call that they hook up through this. That kind of SaaS product, who needs it? I could just go in and show them, look, you just talk to Cursor, Claude Code, whatever, any one of these, and say, this is the API for my ERP. I want to connect it to this, and it would write the code for you.
Do a pretty good job, right? Like you might need to tinker with it, but someone sharp, and this company has a few really sharp thinkers.
Or maybe we do a small engagement and show them the way, but they're not alone out there. Like everyone's going to be able to do that.
So I think the need for software is going to go up, and the need for developers per unit of software is going to go down, which might not be a great thing for your negotiating position. But I think there's an open question of whether the overall need for developers continues to go up because of the promulgation of additional software. You can see a world where,
from a 10,000 foot view, technology is exploding, and it will continue to do so. The need for human beings who can manage that, wrangle it, direct it, use it for your business to succeed, it's going up. The question is that what's the curve of that versus what's the capability of AI? And we don't know that, so there's some uncertainty, but I think they're going to match each other. We're going to need the good folks who can do this.
Yeah, I do think there's very legitimate things to be said about what happens to education, to junior engineers, to what does the pipeline look like? It might look more like apprenticeship,
especially since higher ed is historically slow to adapt. How could they possibly how do you write a syllabus for AI in May for the semester that starts in September? Because by June, your syllabus is obsolete.
Yeah, by May. Your May syllabus is obsolete in May. Our job is to stay on top of this, and it's where we do it by staying on top of the trends, but every few weeks there's some world-shaking improvement. And they're not just these models are better. There are whole new ways of working with these models. So it's really hard to stay on top of. So I do think there's some legitimate concerns on the hand of society, but I do think this is the part where Dustin gets a little passionate, I think. Shocker. The person that's sitting at their desk saying, look at what's being done to us, by AI. We just shouldn't do it. We should figure out a way to stop it from happening. Models are writing bad code. So all these people who are using the models are delusional. There isn't a role for that person in the future of software engineering. And if you're sitting there with that concept in your head, you need to get out of it or you will be unemployed. What those folks need to
do is come up with a dream project where it's, here's this game I always wanted to build, or here's this productivity to-do list I always wanted to build. And crack open one of these best of breed tools, give it, spend 5 minutes talking to it about what you want and let it go. You'll be amazed. I've resurrected 3 or 4 games that I had started in the past 20 years, and my jaw has dropped.
And I've started building an agentic operating system, starting with my productivity system.
Yeah.
And I haven't written code in 10 years. And I'm still not writing code, Andy. I don't have to anymore. And yes, there are new ways of working. But when I said I don't play music, but my understanding of jazz is that it's a very creative. You're listening to the environment and you're going with the flow and you're responding to the other players. And to me, this AI moment for me feels a lot more like flow state than I thought it would, where the hard parts are being taken away and I'm just playing jazz and doing cool things. And some of it doesn't work, but then you go back and you fix it. And so I think I see a class, and it's a small percentage, but there's a class of people who hate the AI. And that's a reasonable position to take. But I think if you will continue to work in this world, and I say this both as a technologist and as an employer, there really isn't a role for you. You're selecting yourself out of that role if you don't want to use these new tools, because the tools have dramatically changed. And that doesn't necessarily mean you won't be doing development, but you certainly won't if you don't. It's like deciding, I just want to write everything in assembler. There's still a few assembler roles somewhere.
Yeah, a lot less. The other moment I'm waiting for is these tools haven't yet, I feel like, come for the top tier in the C-suite. But they're coming for you. So you might now be as a CEO saying, I have to roll this out across my org and people are resisting, and you're like, come on, you just suck it up. But let's face it, it's coming for you. And the role of a CEO is going to dramatically change. And I think this is what I'm actually looking forward to, because how many opinionated, privileged a-holes, sorry, I'm a traditional first.
No, please automate me. I would love to be doing so much of my
big
job.
Corporations where it's no longer a cult of personality from whoever's on top, because it's not going to matter who's on top. Let's face it, the job of leading an organization will be able to be done quite well by these models.
Big chunk of it, for sure.
The human figurehead maybe will be largely symbolic, or maybe it will just be a personality. Someone who's great at getting out and selling things like Steve Jobs would do for Apple. But the core, internal leadership things, you might just be having the AI make a lot of those.
This should be a topic in our next podcast, because I'd love to talk about the role of leadership, because I find while I agree a huge chunk of the job will be automated away, there are 2 things that I think remain, which is I find it hard to conceive of a future where an employee gets on board in a company and says, I really just believe in the direction the AI is leading this company. And I hear this about good leaders and believe it or not, they're out there. People say, I will join any company this person goes to because they're a good leader and because I trust them. And there was a guy here in town named Doug Berg, and he was classic. He started the Apple office, he started the Adobe office, he started the Microsoft office, or Macromedia office, sorry. Macromedia, Adobe, and Microsoft. Or sorry, not Doug Berg, Doug Olson. And so he was a classic leader, but every time he started an office here, you would see the same cast of characters go work with him at the new thing that he was doing, because they would go wherever Doug went because Doug was good at what Doug did and they believed in.
Yeah.
And I think
he was an engineering leader too. He wasn't like a high up executive.
Yeah. And I only knew Doug in passing, and he has since passed, which was a tragedy. But my understanding is he was one of those people that just had that in him as a leader. And the other piece is, I think capital will continue to provide a compelling advantage in any environment, right? So the people who have the money will continue to have the resources, and to some degree they could get disrupted, but the money doesn't really go away.
But you said this was a topic for another podcast. I know the time has passed
46 minutes. Shocking.
Again. I did have one little funny way to end today's episode, which is someone forwarded me. It's not even a very modern AI tool, but it's a translator from Kaggy.com, which is English to McKinsey consultant speak. So I thought just for giggles, I'd wrap up today's episode a la McKinsey consultant.
Excellent.
So here goes. Should I use like a robotic voice too? I don't know how do consultants speak. Do they have a nasally tone? Maybe I'll do that. Anyway, here goes. Thank you for your engagement. To optimize the synergy of your AI and technology roadmap, please leverage our resources at modernlogic.io. We invite you to circle back with Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Production and editorial oversight are managed by Ryan Peterson with strategic contributions from Dylan Brusnak, Anna Smith, and Beth Davis. Our AI brand identity, Lem the Robot, was developed by Becca Run with thematic audio assets provided by Ziv Moran. If you want to get down to brass tacks, please reach out via our dedicated channel at modernlogic.io/podcast. Modern Logic for Your Business is a proprietary production of Modern Logic. To maximize our market reach and impact, we encourage you to share, rate, and review. These metrics are critical to our continued value delivery.
Do it for the synergy.
Do it for the synergy. All right, see you next time.